Morning, Rabbi.
Good morning. Okay, so we're making a little bit of progress. We are about to finish, I guess, the first section of the song. And as we will see, we alluded to it last week, that the first section, okay, just introduction. It's not exactly clear how to divide the sections. There are different opinions, but we're following one opinion that the first section is going to end where we're going to read about just now. And what you will see is that all throughout the first section, if you ask yourself, what is the state of being of these two people, of the man and the woman, you will see that consistently the woman is, her desire and her love is much more intense and much more profound than that of the man. And you will see that come to a peak in the verses we read today. And that's really the first crisis of the book. And because of this crisis, you will see that it stops. You can't go further because they're not on the same page. And then next week we have to come back and think about another angle. And that's what the next section starts. And I'll give you a spoiler alert. The next angle, if you'll read it, you will see that he is much more interested than she is. Okay? So that's the next time. That's the next section. And then the question is, what does that mean? And how do we deal with this idea that they're not aligned? So we'll have to deal with that when we get there. But just to share the verses and read and think about where we're up to in the song, like we said, don't be distracted by the separation of the paragraphs. That's not relevant to us. Last week we read about number 3, or was it 2 weeks ago? It's an apple tree among the trees that they're praising each other. We discussed the differences, that he is willing to give a praise, but she's always taking it much further, and not only talking about the praise, but also bringing in the feeling of closeness. So, for example, when he told her, verse 2, that she is a rose among the thorns, so is my beloved among the daughters. So she's a rose among the thorns, which is very nice. It's very nice to get a compliment. What does she say? So she gives back a compliment, and she says, yeah, as an apple tree among the trees of the forest, you are like an apple tree amongst the barren trees of the forest. But she doesn't stop with the compliment. What does she continue? She says, in his shade I delighted and sat, and his fruit was sweet in my palate. Okay, this is much more than just saying you're a beautiful flower. It's saying, I want to be in your shade. I want to consume your fruit. Your fruit is sweet. That is all references to closeness, to intimacy. And certainly verse 4, he brought me to the banquet hall, and his attraction to me was symbolic of his love. The point here is there's love, there's closeness, there's attachment. You don't see that within him. You don't see him saying that. You see her saying that. Okay, now we get to I guess, the crisis. We're going to read it from verse 5 to verse 7. And that's the section we're going to try to focus on today, because the argument would be, the thesis is that verse 8 is already the next section of the song. What does she say? Sustain me with flagons of wine, spread my bed with apples, for I am lovesick. Cholat ahava, she is lovesick. What's lovesick? Lovesick is somebody that cannot think about anything other than the love. So the love, they can't eat, they can't drink. When a person is ill, he can't function. When a person is ill because of love, they can't function, because the love is taking over the entire life. And what the problem is here, that the love cannot be satisfied. If you love a piece of chocolate cake, you can eat it. If you love a person, you can go and spend time with them. But if the love cannot come to fruition, then that would make the person lovesick. So she is lovesick. Lovesick is in the book. It's the most profound, the most powerful expression of love, intense love. She is lovesick. If I ask you, is he lovesick? The answer is clearly not. He's not even close to it. I mean, he's willing to compliment her. He says, you're much better than the other girls. The other girls, in comparison to you, are like thorns compared to the rose. Very nice. You buy her a rose. It's very nice. But he's not in love. He's not lovesick, and he's not even craving the intimacy. She is. He is not. And now she continues with this description. Verse 6. His left hand. Okay, this is in English. In English, it's hard to explain. In Hebrew, it's neutral. In other words, the tenses are neutral here, because it's present tense in the Hebrew, but the present tense could be referring back. She could be thinking about the past. In the English, they translate it as the past. But in Hebrew, it could be, it is present, which could mean this is what she desires. His left hand was under my head and his right hand embraces me. Okay, so it's present tense. In Hebrew, it's present tense, but it's not that he is embracing her. He's nowhere to be found. What it's saying is that's what she is lovesick for. She is lovesick. She wants the closeness. She wants the embrace. We hit a brick wall. There's a problem. They're not on the same page. And here there is a fascinating verse. It's fascinating, first of all, because it appears at least 3 times throughout the song, and that's why we say the section ends after this verse. It's not exactly clear what the verse is saying. There's at least 2 interpretations, but we'll read it, and we'll read them, what I believe is the most straightforward interpretation. So what does she do? She has this experience. She's in love. The other guy is willing to compliment, but his love is not intense, and he's not seeking closeness. She comes back from the date. What does she tell her friends? What has she learned from this experience? Okay. What has she learned from this experience? This experience taught her something very interesting. What do you learn from experience if you're lovesick? What you learn is that the most important thing, Richard is here. Richard always tells me that the most important thing about a joke is timing. But I think that's really the most important thing about love is timing. And that's what she says. She basically says, don't awaken the love until it's desires. In other words, don't get yourself in love if the other person is not available. You're just going to be frustrated. You're just going to be in pain. And that's what she reads in verse 7, according to one interpretation. I adjure you, make you swear, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the gazelles or by the hinds of the fields. It's very interesting. We'll see later who her beloved is. Her beloved is probably Solomon in the palace. So her descriptions of reality, she's out in the field. And so she wants to make him promise. So she says, I make you promise. Who's the witness? The witness is the gazelles or the hinds of the field. That what? That you neither awaken nor arouse the love while, they're translating while, ad is until. It could also mean while, as Rashi would say, but here we're going to say, take a simple interpretation, until it is desirous. Don't fall in love. Be careful not to fall in love before it's the right time, until it's desirous. Actually, until it wants to. Who wants to? We don't know. Could be means till the other guy wants to. Be careful of falling in love too early. It's not healthy. You're going to be lovesick. It's going to take over your life. You're not going to be able to function. That's her takeaway from this experience. That is one interpretation. I'm going to give her the other interpretation, which Rashi follows. They read the interpretation, ad, not until, usually in the more straightforward word of ad shetachpatz is until it's desirous. They read it, Rashi reads it, and others, ad, they will read it as long. And that's what you have here. Don't neither awaken nor arouse the love while it is desirous. And they read the verse completely different. They read the verse, Rashi and others, the Talmud reads it this way, that she comes back, and what's her takeaway? Her takeaway is she's lovesick. So she tells the other girls of Jerusalem, don't awaken the love, meaning basically the theme is don't distract my love from my beloved to somebody else. And there's 2 expressions, don't awaken, meaning either don't awaken my love for other people, or don't awaken your love for my beloved, don't interfere. And im ta'oreru, or arouse, the Hebrew word for arouse could also mean le'arer is to object. Don't object to my love of my beloved while it is desirous, while I still love him. In other words, the second interpretation is saying that the takeaway is she's basically saying, I'm in love. She turns to the other girls of Jerusalem and says, don't interfere with my love. I'm in love with him. Rashi follows that. Rashi follows that interpretation. The other interpretation, the first interpretation that I said, and that's what the Talmud follows the first interpretation. That is the opposite. What the takeaway is, do not awaken the love prematurely. Don't fall in love too early. It's not healthy. It's not good. You're going to get lovesick. It's painful, right? Love that you cannot fulfill is painful. There's a very beautiful verse, or a painful verse, depending on how you want to read it, at the end of the Song of Songs, chapter 8. Very interesting verse. If this reminds me, the verse we're reading reminds me of that verse. Place my seal on your heart like a seal on your arm. Here, verse chapter 8. So we'll find toward the end of the book. It's the final chapter of the book. Here's the expression. For love is as strong as death. Zeal is as strong as the grave. In other words, love, its coals are coals of fire of a great flame. What we're trying to say here is love is not always enjoyable, right? If you can't fulfill the love, if you're lovesick, then love is as strong as death. Okay, it's a very powerful statement. I'm not sure exactly what it means. What it means is that it's not always pleasant, and that's according to the first interpretation. What the takeaway is, what she's saying. What she is saying is, do not awaken or arouse the love until it's desirous, until the right time. The timing is important, as we will get to that. So because the reason why I like that reading is because that really is consistent with what's happening from the beginning of the book until this point, the chapter and a half, where consistently she is much more involved in this relationship and this love than he is, and that's the end of the first unit. Now what we have to do is we have to read the Rashi to get the historical perspective, and then we get to the Kabbalistic perspective, and then and that's it. That's the agenda. That's the roadmap. Meanwhile, comments, questions, observations, please share. Otherwise, we continue. Okay, so let's start with the historic perspective. The historical perspective is, what are we talking about? When are we lovesick? We're lovesick in the time of exile. When you read the historic perspective, you're going to see that, like Rashi says, the book is written in the time of exile. The book is written in the time when there is a separation between the lovers. However, the book is recounting the time that they were together. So when you're going to read the historical perspective, you have to be willing to jump a little bit, to jump and leap, because the woman is now jumping between her present state of distance and of yearning and going back and thinking about the time of closeness. And there's a jump back and forth. So what we're going to do is we're going to open Rashi and we're going to read about what does it mean that we're lovesick? What does it mean that his left hand was around me, was around my head, and his right hand embraced me? We'll read all of this and see what Rashi says from the historic perspective. Here we go. Okay, so sustain me, right? What was the verse 5? Sustain me with flagons of wine, spread my bed with apples. So Rashi says, sustain me, says Rashi, now as in the manner of the sick, with flagons of grape wine, or with cake of pure white flour. I have no idea where you get white flour from, but okay. She's sick. If someone is sick, they need to be strengthened with wine or good food. Spread my bed around me with apples for good fragrance. She needs a fragrance now. In the manner of the sick, for I am sick for his love, for I thirst for him here in exile. That is the key. Rashi says we are now in exile. We are lovesick. We're love for God. We're desiring God. We're longing for closeness for God, but we don't see God. We don't feel close to God. Throughout the exile, there was terrible persecution. We don't sense his closeness. So we are in love, and that love is intense. And that love cannot be satisfied. If it cannot be satisfied, it's called lovesick. Then Rashi deals with the word rafida, spread my bed. It doesn't really say spread my bed. It says rapduni, which means sort of rapduni, the rapid is like the cover, but it doesn't say what. So Rashi says, well, that means bed. Rafida is an expression of a couch, like in Job, where he lies, your pod is gold upon the mirror. Okay, we'll leave that alone. Okay, what is his left hand was around me? So now we're in exile. We are lovesick. We're sick because we're yearning. And then we think about the time, and that's why here in English they translate it as past tense, because Rashi says it's in the historical perspective, it's past tense. His left hand was under my head and his right hand embraced me. What is that referring to? When God took care of us, when God held us in his embrace. When did God hold us in his embrace? Of course, in the desert when he took us out of Egypt. He traveled, so his left hand was under my head in the desert, and his right hand would embrace me. He traveled a 3-day journeys to search out rest for them, as it says in Numbers. And in the place of the rest, he brought down manna and quails for them. All this I remember now in my exile, and I am sick for his love. Right? So now she's in exile. Now she experiences a separation, but she recounts and she remembers the good times when they were embraced, and that was in the desert. And now the takeaway. Now Rashi is going to say, Rashi, like I said, Rashi takes the other perspective, not the second perspective. I said that what she says is, I'm in love with my beloved. You, nations of the world, don't interfere. So that's what Rashi is going to say. Now, I adjure you, you nations, by the gazelles or by the hinds, that you will be abandoned and preyed upon like gazelles and hinds. In other words, what is she saying? Why are the nations of the world considered like gazelles, like svaot, like deer? So the point is, if you don't listen, then you will be punished, and you will be abandoned. You'll be hefker. You'll be free for anyone to go and hunt like the gazelles of the field. That what should they not do? That you neither awaken nor arouse the love that is between my beloved and I, to change it and to alter it and beg me to be enticed to follow you. Don't awaken the love don't awaken love for somebody else and distract me from my love to God. While it is desirous, even though, like I said, in usually Hebrew, ad is until, but Rashi says that it means while. Like, while the king was at his table. While the king was still at his table, we discussed that's chapter 1 of Song of Songs. So in Song of Songs, there are twice where until really means while, according to Rashi. That you neither awaken, Hebrew ta'iru, if you cause hatred and has become your adversary, are, and this interpretation for your foes, le'ar. So you have various biblical sources where the root for awaken could also mean conflict, adversary. And that leads us into the next Rashi, nor contest. Hebrew to oriru, like one who has contested the ownership, ha'orer, of a field. This Rashi quotes from the Talmud, from Ketubot. So if you want to contest and you want to say the ownership is yours, the Hebrew word is le'orer, to contest, to object. So in other words, there's 2 points here. We're telling the nations of the world, don't awaken us, don't awaken our love for somebody else, for other gods, and don't distract the love. Don't question this love. And Rashi quotes the Hebrew, the word in Old French, what that means, to contest, to claim. Now, Rashi says there are many Agadic midrashim, but they do not fit the sequence of the topics. And this is how Rashi views this entire song. That's why it's important Rashi to read. I'm reading 3 lines from the bottom before the end of the Rashi. For I see that Solomon prophesied and spoke about the exodus from Egypt and about the giving of the Torah, the tabernacle, the entry into the land, the temple, the Babylonian exile, and the coming of the second temple and its destruction. Rashi says this was a book written by Solomon, and this is prophecy, and it's about all of Jewish history. So it begins with the Exodus, it continues throughout the desert, being through the desert, building of the temple, then the exile, then the rebuilding of a second temple, and then the final exile. So in other words, from Rashi's perspective, this is talking about the historic, and because it's historic, what the Jewish people are saying, we are in love with God during the exile. Do not interfere. Do not get in the way, and do not interfere. Do not get into the way, and that's it. That's there's no problem here. There's no problem with awakening the love. Like I said, the other way of reading it is that the woman comes home and learns the lesson. The lesson is don't awaken the love. Don't create a love when it's premature. And that too has a historic perspective. I'm going to close this here because it's not in Rashi. It's from other people. It's in the Ibn Ezra, but it's also based on the Talmud. And the Talmud says something fascinating. The Talmud says, based on this verse, and like I said, this verse appears 3 times throughout the song. So Rashi says like this, the Talmud says like this, there were 3 oaths. When God sent the Jewish people to exile, he made them take 3 oaths. What are the 3 oaths? That different forms, but the point is they should not rebel against the nations where they are in exile. They should not force their way up to Jerusalem prematurely. This is very interesting. You can't go out of the exile too early. What does that have to do with the song? This is the verse. Because what is the takeaway of verse 7? The takeaway of verse 7 is that maybe the woman may be in love, but the man is not in love yet. So it's not the proper time. And the commentaries explain that this happened earlier. There's a whole medrash. There's a medrash where the people who left Egypt prematurely and they were killed because they didn't have the divine protection. And sometimes doing something prematurely is dangerous. So of course we're lovesick. Of course we want to go out of the exile. Of course we want to push our way out. But says the Talmud based on this verse, what the woman realizes is I may be in love, but it's not the right time now. And therefore he should not, and therefore we cannot bring about the love too early. We cannot create the redemption prematurely. And if you know a little bit of history of the Jewish people in the 20th century and late 19th century with the Zionist movement, the opposition to the Zionist movement was, I'm not getting into politics, whether it was justified or not, but the opposition of the Zionist movement, especially from the Satmar Hasidim, was based on this Talmud. There's 3 oaths. You're not allowed to push your way up by force against the nations to bring about the redemption. Others said, well, it's not by force, because now we have finally the British agree, right? So that was really the debate. But the point here is the notion that we can't bring about the redemption by force against the will of the nations of the world. The Talmudic idea, loyalty to the nations that you are living under their protection, that comes from the idea that you may be in love, you may want to run back to Israel and rebuild the temple, but the timing is not yet ready. What is that? That she realizes that she's lovesick, but the guy is still taking his time. So that is the reading of the simple story, at least according to the 2 ways of reading it, and then the reading of the historical perspective. And now we have a few more minutes, so we can do a little bit of the Kabbalistic perspective.
Rabbi, what was the 3rd oath? The first is not rebelling against the nations. The second is not forcing into Jerusalem.
So let me check a second because I don't want to make a mistake.
Okay.
I'm sorry, the third one. The third one is that God made the nations of the world swear not to oppress the Jewish people too much. That's one opinion in the Talmud. And so one's against. The other two is that they should not go up by force to Israel. They shouldn't go up by force to Israel, and they should not rebel against the nations of the world. In other words, they should not rebel against the nations whom they live under.
And which is the verse that it's relating to, you're saying?
Right here, verse 7. Im ta'iru, you shall neither awaken it nor arouse the love until it's desirous. But the key here is Nishbati etchem, I adjure you. I adjure you. And it says that this verse appears 3 times throughout the song. That's where you get to the notion of three oaths. So how does this verse tell you that you should not force your way up to Israel? So the only way it does that, if you learn the first way that we learned. The first way that we learned is don't awaken the love until it's desirous. Don't awaken the love, not like Rashi, which says while, but don't awaken the love until it's desirous. Don't push the relationship prematurely, right? If you really want to, if you're really in love with somebody, but that person has not ripened yet, if you push too much, it's not gonna create the relationship. It will actually harm the relationship. So the Talmud is studying this verse the way we did in the first way, which is do not awaken the love when it's premature. Do not go back to Israel when it's premature. Do not rebel against the nations of the world to create redemption when it's too early. Now, how do you know when it's too early? Okay, that's another question. Maybe the Balfour Declaration is proof that the nations of the world allow it. So I'm just trying to say that we don't have. I don't want to get into the politics of the. In other words, I don't want to get into the question of the Orthodox perspective on the modern Zionist movement. But the point here is that you see what the Talmud is coming from. The Talmud is coming from is that there is a notion that just because something is right and good, doing it too early would be dangerous. And that comes from this, and that's really a reflection of the story where she is lovesick, he's not there yet.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we did two out of three perspectives, so that's good. We can go home. No, I'm kidding. I need another few minutes, and we'll do the third perspective. Okay, so I'm going to read a discourse of the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Chabad Rebbe, and we'll tell you what he does with this verse. Again, like I said, most of the things we do is from Rabbi Shneur Zalman, the founder of the Chabad movement. But on these verses, his commentary does not appear in the Likutei Torah. His commentary appears elsewhere. So the bottom line is, I went straight to his grandson, who elaborates on what he says. And he talks about being lovesick. That's the first step. What is lovesick? And this is very, very interesting, because in Hebrew, you have connections between words that are seem unrelated in Hebrew, in English, in other languages, but in Hebrew, they are related. And if they're related, it's because it's an inner connection, an inner spiritual connection. Okay? And this is actually interesting. The word for prayer, the word for weekday, and the word for sick are the same word. Let's see if we can make heads or tails. Okay, so chola. Then there's a word, in the Bible, there are 10 ways to say prayer. One of them is like vayechal, is the verb, vayechal, and Moshe prayed when when the Jewish people created the golden calf, and after the Jewish people created the golden calf, the verse says vayechal Moshe. Moshe implored, he asked God. So that's one of the 10 expressions of prayer, vayechal. And we say other words, chalu napnei el. We say it in the supplications, in the slichot. The word lechalot is to pray, intense prayer. So we have sickness, we have prayer, and then chol. Chol is the weekday. What do you have between prayer, sick, and weekday? What is the answer? The answer is clear. The answer is, what is prayer? Prayer is longing. Longing is sick. I'm lovesick. I'm missing something. I'm sick. What does this have to do with the weekday? Because the weekday prayer is the prayer of lovesick. However, on Shabbat, we're not lovesick. On Shabbat is a taste of the Messianic era. And that's why, according to the Kabbalah, it's based on the verse in Isaiah, Az titaneg al Hashem. On Shabbat, it's the time of delight. We have pleasure with God. In other words, Shabbat, we can have a taste of the redemption, and then we feel close to God. During the week, we feel distant because God's presence is less available. And that's why the prayer of the weekday is called vayechal, which comes from the word sick, because it's longing. And longing is a sickness because you can't quench the thirst. If you can't quench the thirst, you are sick, you're missing your life. And that's the idea of lovesick. And that's why lovesick is related to the weekday, because the prayer, because prayer is the longing to God. And that's why it's specifically the weekday, because when Mashiach comes in the end of days, we will have that love will be satisfied. According to the Kabbalah, it's called Ava B'Ta'anugim. It's love of delight, love of pleasure. Right now we have, even if we love God, it's love of yearning. Then you have love of pleasure when you sense the closeness, but we don't sense the closeness until Mashiach comes. However, on Shabbat, we have a taste of the redemption. And that's why in Shabbat, the prayer is not considered, it's not called, first of all, Shabbat is not called Chol. Shabbat, the 6 days of the week are called sickness. In other words, they are days when we are lovesick. They are days which by design, we're going to be more distant than Hashem, than God. What is Shabbat? Shabbat is healing. If it's healing, why is it healing? Because it's spiritual healing. If it's spiritual healing, because we can sense that the light of God, which that will heal our being lovesick. So that is one element of just talking about what lovesick means. Then there's another whole discussion of what aspect of what type of, if we want to become lovesick, we want the love of God to take over our whole existence. What type of meditation will make us lovesick? That's another discussion, which we'll get to that in a minute. I want to before that, let's deal with the response. How to make yourself lovesick is another story. We'll get to that in a minute. Okay, let's deal with that. Let's deal with that for a second. We're going to go to the Kabbalah. I promised you the Kabbalah of Song of Songs. I got to give you some Kabbalah. So I'm going to give you 2 Kabbalistic terms, which you heard about before, but I just want to spend 120 seconds on these ideas. According to the Kabbalah, what's the Kabbalah's big idea? The Kabbalah's big idea is the unity of God. God is everywhere. The problem is that God is not everywhere. I look around, I don't see God. I see creation. Okay, so how do I deal with this quote unquote problem? Right? Before you study the Kabbalah, there's no problem. What is God? God is the creator. What is creator? Creator means there's a creation. There's no problem. But according to the Kabbalah, when Moses says in the Torah, you should know that in the heaven above and the earth below, God is God. There is nothing else. He doesn't mean there's no other gods. He means there's nothing else. Everything is godliness. Godliness is everywhere. There's no other existence besides for godliness. But we don't sense that. So how do you solve that problem? So according to the Kabbalah, there are 2 types of awareness of divine unity. One is called the upper unity and one is called the lower unity. And which one is true? They're both true. That's a beautiful concept. That the verse says, Kel Deot Hashem, Chana in a prayer on Rosh Hashanah says that God is the God of perspectives, not awareness, but awareness in the plural. There are multiple perspectives, and they're both true, because you're going to see in a minute, both perspectives are true. It depends which perspective you're taking. Now, when we pray, we want to connect to both perspectives. The Shema, the verse, Shema Yisrael, Hear, O Israel, Lord is our God, Lord is our God, Lord is one, is a verse that, according to the Kabbalah, talks about the upper unity, the higher level of unity, which we'll discuss in a minute. The problem is that in the days of Moses, you can relate to that. Now we are not on that level of the upper unity. So you can do all you want. You can say Shema all you want. It's likely that the upper level of unity is not going to speak to you. So what did the rabbis do? The rabbis inserted within the Shema, there's a mitzvah to say the Shema. They inserted within the Shema between verse 1 and verse 2. Verse 1 is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, Lord is one. Verse 2 is, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. What do the rabbis do? In between these 2 verses, they inserted a different sentence. Blessed be the name of the glory of his kingdom forever and ever. Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto L'Olam Va'ed. This is a wonderful verse, but what's it doing in the middle of the Shema? How do the rabbis have the audacity to stick it in the middle of the Shema? God never said those words at that place. So the Kabbalistic answer is very simple. Not everybody is on the level of the upper unity, or at least part of our consciousness cannot relate to the upper unity. So therefore, the rabbis instituted, let's bring in the lower level of unity, say the next verse, which represents the lower level of unity. What do I mean? What is the upper level of unity? What is the lower level of unity? The upper level of unity, in short, is to say, if you could understand, you can't sense it, but you can understand it intellectually. Intellectually speaking, compared to the infinity of God, this universe, no matter how profound and how large it is and how expansive it is, this universe is completely insignificant compared to the infinity of God. Because a finite being, in comparison to infinite, is a different category. It has no significance whatsoever. If you want to compare one ray of light to the intensity of the light of the sun, okay, that's insignificant. So it's there, but it's not there. You could say God is everywhere, but we say, what about the world? The world is completely insignificant because I understand that in comparison to the infinity of God, the world there's nothing other than God. And that's what it says. Hashem echad, God, Lord is one. Lord is one. There's nothing else. Now, you theoretically could understand this intellectually, but you can't sense this. You can't sense it because we see what our senses tell us. So what do the rabbis say? There's a lower level of unity. What's the lower level of unity? The lower level of unity is, listen, ladies and gentlemen, the world exists. God created the world. But the world doesn't have its own independent existence. It's being created by God. In other words, God is so great, he can create this beautiful world. That's not true. In other words, that's not the ultimate truth. The ultimate truth is that in comparison to God's essence, God's infinity, the world is insignificant. But the lower level of unity says the opposite. The world is very significant and it's so great. And God is so powerful. You know how great God is? He can create this world. Wow. That now we understand who God is. So if you're in the lower level of unity, you sense that the world exists, but you understand that the world has a source and the world is dependent on its source. And the source is God who is the king. And that's why the second phrase doesn't say God is one, meaning there's only one existence. The second phrase talks about God's kingdom. If God's a king, there must be subjects. If you're a king, there must be a kingdom. And the world is the kingdom. Now you love God either based on one of these two awarenesses. Either you love God because you understand that everything is insignificant compared to the intensity of his infinity. That's the higher level of unity. What they call Yehuda Ilah, the higher unity in Aramaic, because the Zohar speaks in Aramaic. Or you have the lower level of unity, which is a beautiful kingdom. But God is the king of the kingdom. Okay, there's still a kingdom. Kingdom is not independent. Kingdom needs God. God, I serve you. I love you because you give me life. In the first level of unity, I don't exist. The world doesn't exist. I mean, it exists, but it's insignificant. On the second level of unity, I'm very important. I love myself. I love God because he gives me what I need. Right? It's a total different perspective. By the way, why? When we say the Shema, why do we say, hear, O Israel? Why do we say, hear, listen? Why don't we say, we want to see Israel? In the Torah, there's the expression of seeing, and even you can have the eyes of the mind. The eyes of the mind can see things. At Sinai, it says, about Sinai, the verse says, Ata hareta ladat, you have been shown to know. God showed us his unity. Showed us means it was real to us. We sensed it like we see a physical phenomenon. So what's the answer? The answer is, at the higher level of unity, we could never sense as if it's reality, because we're a created being. So we could hear about it. Hear about it means we think about it as something abstract, but we can't fully sense it. That's why in the Shema, we don't say, see Israel, we say hear. Hear is something, it's not right in front of you. You could think about it abstractly. Why am I saying this? Because the Tzemach Tzedek talks about this for many, many pages. And then he gets to the interesting point. The interesting point, if I ask you, which level will make you lovesick? The upper unity or the lower unity? Says the Tzemach Tzedek counterintuitively, I think, that the lower unity would make you lovesick, not the upper unity. Because there's a problem with the lower unity. First of all, the upper unity we can't relate to, so it's never going to take us over completely. The lower unity would be the person who senses, whenever he looks at the world, whenever he looks at nature, he senses the presence of God. God is close. And yet, because I see the creation, I see the function of God, I see the expression of God. And yet, the fact that God is so close, and yet I understand that this is not the essence of God, that the essence of God defies me, and I will never be able to grasp the essence of God. That is what creates the lovesick. Lovesick means he's here, but he's not here. I could sense him, but I could never sense his essence. That's what would make me lovesick. So the point here is, I just went into all of this to explain what aspect of godliness would create us lovesick. According to the Kabbalah, it's the lower level of unity, which you could sense. You sense God's presence, but you could never grasp his essence, because the world, nature, is not God's essence. But we could sense it, we could see it. So because we could see it wherever we look, we see he's right here, but he's elusive. And now we're lovesick. Now, some people on this call don't like to be lovesick. In other words, we have to cure the love sickness. And that's what the verse is going to continue and say, how to ease the pain of the love sickness. And as you read the verse, what did the verse tell you? Drink wine and get apples. That's what it said. So we'll deal with that in a minute, right? That's what the verse said. The woman says, I'm lovesick, so you got to treat me. What's the cure? The cure is, here it is, verse 5. Sustain me with flagons of wine, spread my bed with apples, for I am lovesick. Okay, we'll get to that in a minute. Meantime, Vicky, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a quick question about how come the lower unity feeling will get you more lovesick? Is it because, not only because of the beauty of the world, maybe most likely because of the imperfections of the world?
It could be, but the point here is you cannot fall in love with an abstract idea, right? If you love
Yeah,
something, so that's the idea. The higher level of unity is an abstract idea. The lower level of unity, it has a disadvantage because it's not the full truth. In other words, it's not the ultimate truth. The ultimate truth is not that God's greatness is that he created an apple tree or that he created a sunset. No, God, compared to the true essence of God, that's totally insignificant. The entire universe is insignificant. The whole planet is a speck of dust compared, is a grain of salt, a grain of sand compared to the universe. Compared to God, you can't even compare it. But that God, which is the true God, that God is an abstract idea. You can't fall in love with an abstract idea. You can't fall in love with something you hear about, right? If you see, you have to see. And the seeing with God is funny because on one hand, if you see the person you love, so they're in your house, so you see them, so what's the lovesick? The problem here is that you see God, so that awakens the love, but you don't see God. You see the function of God. You see the presence of God. You sense him. He's making every flower grow. He's making every blade of grass turn. But on the other hand, you say, this is just a tease. Why is it a tease? Because I can't get the essence. Why can't I get the essence? I can't get the essence because the essence is infinite. So that's a built-in lovesick. There's a built-in gap that you cannot overcome. You will never be able to overcome until the end of days when you will see the essence of God. In other words, the essence of God will be palpable to you, will be real to you, as if you're seeing it with your mind of your eyes. Right? That's what Isaiah says. In the end of days, V'ro kol basar yachdav, all flesh will see the word of God. In other words, we will sense that higher level of unity. Okay, so we're in love. Go ahead. So we're in love. So what do we solve the problem? So the verse says very clearly, you have to give me wine and give me apples. So in short, we don't have too much time. Apples and wine is Torah and mitzvot. Why is that? Wine is pleasurable. Wine is the secrets of Torah. Study Torah and do the mitzvot. Mitzvot are more like apples because apples, in this context, the apples are for fragrance, smell. And according to the Kabbalah, Torah is knowledge that you internalize. So it's like you're drinking it. You're taking it inside of you. It's becoming part of your bloodstream. A mitzvah, according to the Kabbalah, works differently. The mitzvah is not internalized within you. It's more like a garment. It surrounds you, creates an environment, but it has an effect even if it's not internalized. Like if I put on tefillin, but I don't understand what it is, it's still a mitzvah because that light of God encompasses me, surrounds me. If I study Torah and I don't understand what I studied, that's not a mitzvah because the function of the Torah is to be internalized within my mind. So the point here is if you're lovesick, what could you do? Study Torah and do the mitzvah. How does that cure the lovesick? The lovesick is I want the essence of God. How could it be that if I open up the Mishnah and I see two guys arguing about a garment and you divide the garment, you get 50%, you get 50%, how does that quench my thirst for the essence of God? I want to sense the essence of God. How is it possible that eating in the sukkah, doing a mitzvah, will quench that essence, that will quench the desire to cleave to the essence of God? Because seemingly I still don't sense the essence of God. So the answer is like this. This is why it's not fully. I'm still lovesick, but it still eases the pain of distance. Why? Because even though I don't know the essence of God, but I grasp the essence of God's will. I know exactly what God wants in this situation. This is an expression of God's will. This is exactly what God wants. Why he wants it, and what's the depth of the understanding, and what are the multiple layers of reason, that doesn't really matter. In other words, that I don't know, and that's why I'm still lovesick. But I can be assured that when I am doing this mitzvah or studying this bit of knowledge, I am literally grasping, if not the essence of God, it's the essence of God's will. And if it's the essence of God's will, that will soothe, not cure, but it will soothe the pain of being lovesick.
Beautiful.
We're not done yet. We're just getting started. I know it's 10:48. We have to deal with verses 6 and 7, which is the harder verses to deal with. Let's go back to verse 7. Okay, so that's verse 5. Sustain me with flagons of wine, spread my bed with apples, for I am lovesick. Okay, his hand was under my left, his left hand under my head, and his right hand would embrace me. Okay, go ahead, Richard.
Okay. just in retrospect to what you said a couple minutes ago, you're talking about the end of days to see what the essence of God is.
Well, I'm not going to say you can never see the essence of God. The God has no image. What I mean when you will see, I mean the difference between hearing something and seeing something is like they say in English, seeing is believing. When you see something, if you saw something that happened, it's real to you. So when we say see God, we don't mean you could see God. There's nothing to see. We mean that the knowledge, the understanding of God's existence, of God's infinity, becomes real to you, more real than the table you see in front of you. Go ahead.
Okay, so the point that I want to make, when they say, or you say, when the statement is made, end of days to understand the essence of God, the end of days, is that referring to an individual's end of days or the end of humanity?
I'm talking about Mashiach, the coming of Mashiach. What's Mashiach? The world will be filled with the knowledge of God. Time of exile, according to the Kabbalah, is not just a technicality. It's not just the geographical place. Well, we used to be living in Jerusalem, and we had a temple to serve God. And now, because we were sent away, we live in Babylonia, or in Western Europe, or in Eastern Europe, or in the United States. No, that is true, but that's not the full exile. The exile is not just geographical, but the exile is conceptual. Once the temple has been destroyed, the awareness of God that is possible to be had in this world has been diminished, because the temple is the place where God dwells. What does it mean that God dwells? It means that that's where the holiness of God can be internalized within the world, and from the temple it spreads to the rest of the world. So when the temple does not exist, we cannot have that same awareness of godliness. That's why there's an exile. And that's why going back to Jerusalem now, you can go to Jerusalem, you can buy falafel, you can buy a nice hotel room, but we're still in exile. And we still say next year in Jerusalem, because Jerusalem is not just the geography, it's geographical location. Jerusalem is a state of mind. Jerusalem is a state of awareness. Yirah Shalem, complete awe, complete awareness of God. And when Mashiach comes and Jerusalem will be rebuilt, it's not just the geographically. In other words, it's not just physically, it's also that represents that the awareness of God is once again possible to be had in this world. And that's when the lovesick is cured, because we feel close to the essence, we feel close to God.
So what's going to take this to bring it about? I mean, I understand when people come together, when there's peace in the world, and etc. But what is going to take? What is going to be the key? Okay, Mashiach is coming. It's not when he's going to come. He's coming. Okay, I understand that. But what is it going to take for the appearance?
I'll tell you. If you're following the story, this fits in very good. I love this question. This is a good question. If you're following the story, the woman is in love. The woman wants Mashiach to come. The guy's not here yet. The guy's not there. So I want a relationship with you. I'm the woman. I want a relationship. What is it going to take? That's what she's saying. She's saying, where are you? What's the answer? The answer is he has to show up. She can't know him if he's not showing up. He has to show up. And so that ties into the simple story, and that ties into the Kabbalistic interpretation of the left hand and the right hand. His left hand was under my head, but not is under my head, and his right hand would embrace me. You can read this in multiple ways. One way to read this is simply, there's one way to read it that the left side is Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, right side is Sukkot. Simply, love, the left hand and the right hand is the awe, left side is awe, and right side is love. And what does it mean that God's left hand is under my head and his right hand embraces me? It means that when I study Torah, remember the apples and the wine is Torah mitzvah. When I study Torah and do a mitzvah, then occasionally God will gift me with the love and awe, the awareness of God's presence in a way that I cannot create on my own. Only God can gift it to me. So Richard's right. You can, from the Kabbalistic perspective, yes, it's going to happen in the end of days, but it doesn't have to happen in the end of days. God can gift it to you. Sometimes you can get an awareness of God, a feeling of inspiration that you cannot create on your own. How did it come from? Where did it come from? God embraced you. God embraced you. His right hand embraced you. I mean, physically. In other words, he helped you physically. You got an addition in your bank account. Or it can be spiritually. You feel close. You feel love. You feel inspired. You feel connected. And that's God embracing you. But that's love that comes from above. And then we get to verse 7. Verse 7, dun, 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 we're talking about a love, the awareness that I'm loving, the awareness that we're thirsting for is a love that we cannot create on our own. We cannot get the essence of God on our own. We can't even get the love and awe that God will give us. We can't create that on our own. We're supposed to create love on our own, but that's a lower level of love. To quench our thirst for the essence of God, that only God can give us. And that's what he's saying. He's telling the woman is saying, I understand something. I learned that I can neither awaken nor arouse the love until it is desirous. In other words, of course, there's a love that you can create on your own. But then there's the awareness and the feeling of closeness to God that even if you want it, it's not up to you. The other party has to be invested. And sometimes God will come and God will awaken it. But it's saying, I can't do it on my own. God has to be here. And basically, that's the awareness that we're in a relationship. And in a relationship, I could want it, but the other person has to be there. And therefore, there is a love that I create to God through, ironically, just to sum everything up, through, ironically, not the upper level of unity, but the lower level of unity, understanding that when I look at the universe, I'm seeing the creation of God, the handiwork of God. And therefore, I sense God's closeness, even though I understand that that's not God's essence. On the contrary, the closeness creates the longing to the essence because he's so here, he's so close and so elusive together. And that creates that longing and that lovesick. And then what do we do about the lovesick? I'm in love. What do I tell my friends? My friends, look, this is the story of love. This is what I learned about love. I learned that it's not only about you, it's also about the other person. And sometimes he will come and embrace you, but you can't awaken that. You can't get that level of love, that level of awareness until it's desirous, until he decides to show up. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is the conclusion of the first section of the song, according to the simple meaning. And then, like I said, the Kabbalistic meaning, I don't know if it divides so perfectly. But the point here is that next week we start back and we talk about, now that we spoke about from the perspective of the woman, it's going to shift to the perspective of the man. Everything God did for the Jewish people. And you know what happens? Eventually, he comes to her. And you know what she says? She says, I'm busy, come back later. It's exactly what the song says. But that would be for next week. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is a story in short. Questions, comments, jokes, any other comments, please share. Otherwise, have a wonderful day. And of course, thank you for joining because I'm very much enjoying this. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Great.
Shabbos.
Have a wonderful Shabbos, everybody. Be well.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Thank you.